All right. Well, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this uplink session on the history and future of girly retro gaming. My name is Rachel Simone Weil, and if you don't know it already, you are about to learn that I love girly video games and electronic toys from the 80s and 90s. It is a pure joy to talk about them with you today on my birthday, of all days. And I hope you come away with some of the joy and excitement that I want to share. And before we get started, of course, I want to welcome my two very special guests, the co-directors of Video Game History Foundation, and two lovely people I'm just like so privileged to call my friends, Frank Cifaldi and Kelsey Lewin.
Hi.
Hi. What a good intro.
Yeah. We are the co-directors of the Video Game History Foundation. We're a charity that is trying to document and preserve the history of video games so that people write more books and stuff about them. There's just not enough of those. And we're mostly here because we're fans of Rachel and we just like to hear her talk. So
she's the expert here.
Cool. So I'll intro myself briefly. Again, I'm Rachel Simone Weil. I'm the director and founder of FEMICOM Museum, which I started in 2012 and has been kind of focused on two sort of parallel goals, which is around preserving the history of video games for girls. And we'll talk more about what we think that means in a moment. And also celebrating girly, cute, and sort of femme aesthetics through retro gaming. And so in the first part of our hour together, I want to share some stories and artifacts on screen from the FEMICOM Museum collection, which I'm so excited about because usually I'm not able to do this when I give talks. I can't ever bring my collection of rare video games to conventions, but since I'm at home and the archives are sitting next to me in acid-free labeled boxes right off screen, I'm actually able to give a hands-on sort of curatorial walkthrough of some of my favorite girly game artifacts and how they fit into the history of video games. And I hear Frank and Kelsey have some items as well that they're going to share. So I guarantee between the three of us, you are going to see so many video games that you have never seen before.
I feel very privileged because even when we've hung out just privately, you've not really pulled stuff out and shown me. So I'm very excited too.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what y'all brought as well. So I mentioned before that, the FEMICOM Museum has this focus on preserving the history of video games for girls. And I'll confess that that phrase, video games for girls, has been sort of contentious, possibly by design. So I want to talk a little bit about what that means to me. And in particular, I want to start by talking about what my work with FEMICOM Museum is not. So it's not about cataloging the history of women in the video game industry, although that's a totally worthy, interesting topic. It's not what I do. It's also not about female gamers or women who play video games, which is like a hugely broad group of humans that I could never, possibly claim to speak for. So really, FEMICOM Museum is specifically about cataloging the history of video games, electronic toys, and software that were designed for and marketed to girls. And by girls, I mean like female children and teenagers, to be clear. Because keep in mind, in the 80s and 90s, video games were strongly marketed to children specifically. And so I think it makes sense to focus on video games for girls, right, children. Things like the NES, for example, were certainly very strongly marketed to children. And because FEMICOM focuses on games that were for girls, kind of from this intent perspective, that means that these games and toys often embody stereotypes about what girls like. So they're often pink. They often feature girls' franchises like Barbie and Hello Kitty and Nancy Drew. And like all video games for kids, some are good, some are garbage, some are hidden gems, some have fascinating backstories, and some are just kind of gorgeous to look at. And so I'm going to just jump in, speaking of gorgeous to look at, and show you one of my favorite items from the FEMICOM Museum collection. This is Electronic Polly Pocket, and I posted a photo of this earlier in the chat, so you may have seen it. Now, I didn't own this game as a child. In fact, I didn't own pretty much anything in my collection as a child. But this is so emblematic of my childhood visually. the colors, the UI design. It's just gorgeous. And in fact, LCD games made by Tiger, actually Tiger made a lot of handheld games like this that were specifically marketed to girls. So for example, games based on Disney IP like Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. And they had TV ads that were very much targeting girls. And the reason for this is that games like this were a lot more affordable than an entire game console. So it was less risky to branch out into different markets and less risky for the parents who were maybe wanting to buy something for a daughter, but they didn't want to spend hundreds of dollars. This was a very affordable entry point. And another thing to keep in mind is that at this time in the early 90s, traditional toy companies were freaking out about video games because they were taking their market share. And as I'm sure many of you know, some toy companies actually went into the console business, right? Mattel, Coleco, which Coleco was known for making Cabbage Patch dolls, did the ColecoVision. So some traditional toy companies decided to pivot, and other toy companies saw a plan of attack in making electronic toys for girls, which they considered this sort of underserved market. We actually got a blossoming of electronic toys for girls in the 90s. So things like the electronic Polly Pocket, things like, here's another Tiger game, the Princess Dear Diary. So these kind of organizer diary trackers, often had like horoscope functionality. These were, again, really popular. We also have a couple items from Japan. This is another one of my favorites. I think I'm going to be saying that a lot today.
They're all your favorites.
I know, it's so hard to choose. This is the Herpit, or one of the entries in the Herpit series from Bandai, and this is a love horoscope action LCD game. And I just want to quickly take this out of the box so we can see some of the gorgeous product design. Here is our manual.
Ooh,
that's great. Where'd the dog go, though?
Actually, yeah, speaking of toy companies getting into games, that's Bandai, right? Which is primarily a toy company.
Exactly. Look at this absolutely gorgeous star and heart buttons, the screen there. Just another gorgeous piece of product design. So you see a lot of games like this. I have one more I want to share, which this is clearly not a video game. This is firmly in electronic toyland, but I just love this one. This is the Koromo no Omocha Reco Mail, which is allows you to record and play back voice greetings on magnetic stripe cards. So you can see it's a little device and you swipe it like a credit card. So you can trade actual voicemail with your friends, leave a voice message and trade them on these cards. How cool.
That is so cool.
So these are some examples of ways that, these, again, traditional toy companies were trying to reach out to underserved markets. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about one that was incredibly popular in the US, which was electronic board games. Like this one, this is Girl Talk Dateline. I believe this is from 1889. But we also had Electronic Dream Phone, Ask Xandar, Electronic Mall Madness. And so again, this is sort of capitalizing on electronic board game craze of the 90s. And the board game companies were one of the ones that were really concerned about the rise of video games. So they leaned hard into appealing to girls.
Well, and I think I remember that one, which probably suggests that they must have marketed it pretty heavily on TV. They probably had commercials for that.
Yeah, in fact, I think Electronic Dream Phone had Mila Kunis, a young Mila Kunis was in the advertisement for that. You can go see it on YouTube. Yeah, those games were widely marketed. And I think they were the ones I encountered the most as a child. I didn't grow up with video games, and being an only child, board games weren't usually a thing, but at sleepovers and things like that, I definitely remember games like this coming out.
Yeah, and to your point, where you were talking about the toy companies, being afraid of video games taking over. I don't know if you've spent some time at the Strong Museum, haven't you, Rachel, or is that just us?
I haven't been yet.
You haven't been yet.
It's on
okay.
my list.
But I spent a lot of times with the toy trade magazines, from the late 80s and early 90s. And you see them in 87 or so being like, video games are trying to come back, but whatever, that's not going to work. And like by 1989, you know, the top 10 toy sales, like the first 5 are NES games, and then it's like Barbie and stuff after that. And that was a very real concern for the toy companies, was that all of the toy sales were becoming Nintendo, and they had to compete with that. And a lot of them didn't want to actually, you know, go through the process of working with Nintendo. They wanted to make their own products.
Yeah.
And not every toy.
Yeah, and that reminds me. What's that?
So I'm saying not every toy, I'm sure, just becomes an NES game really easily.
Right.
I mean, it was easy enough for Mattel to go, okay, we can just kind of throw Barbie in a world like this, but not every toy can do that, and also not every toy should do that, probably.
There were definitely some questionable decisions made there. Yeah, actually Micro Machines. Sorry, this is a tangent. It has nothing to do with Girly Games, but remember the Micro Machines game? That was so fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, that one's like a sure thing, right? Because it's racing. It works really well. But yeah, it was a really good game on the NES.
Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out to for those who weren't alive during this time, like I was. At the time in the early 90s, video games were primarily sold in toy stores. Like Toys R Us was the probably main place people went to buy NES games, and then there were specialty retailers that popped up. Like what was that called? What was the name of the game shop that doesn't exist anymore?
Funkoland?
Funkoland, yes, thank you. Yeah, so I think, you know, talking about this in the context of toys makes more sense in that time, and again, also being marketed to kids. I think another thing that's interesting about this pivot to electronic toys is that it actually creates a historical challenge today, because these games are not what we consider, like, they don't meet the criteria of video games, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times when I would go to video game databases and say, hey, can you add this? It was like, well, no, that's not really a video game per se. And, you know, I think these things that were marketed to girls were sort of not video games as we define them narrowly by design. And so one thing that I've been kind of interested in is sort of pushing that definition of video games. You know, I've also heard like, well, that's not really a game, that's software. And it's like, well, League of Legends is software. Oh no, that's different. So
well, it's kind of an interesting discussion, right? Like, does that horoscope thing, does it become a video game if there's like a really bad mini game within the horoscope thing?
Right. Yeah.
Right,
and there's like
to come on a cartridge or something like that for people to, because there are games that are software on things like the Game Boy. I mean, you have this productivity software. You have people who are going off after things like the Racer Mate Challenge on the NES, which is just, you know, you sit on your bike at home and it's nothing. It just shows you roads and, you know, tracks how, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Tracks how far you pedaled. I mean, are those games? Because if those count as games, then yeah, of course a horoscope game does too.
Yeah. So I think too, like, you know, we've kind of been talking a little bit about the difficulties with retail in the early days of sort of girly games. And I think there's another interesting strategy that these companies took. You know, like I said before, computer games designed for girls, they were difficult to place in retail stores because there was a belief that girls or their parents wouldn't walk down the software aisle. And so what we saw as a way to get around that are some really interesting kind of workarounds. This is one of my favorites. I don't know if y'all have seen this, Frank and Kelsey. This is a Earring Magic software pack. Earring Magic software.
Cool.
So this is a regular Mattel doll that's packaged with 2 floppy disks. One of them contains a software, like a stationery designer, so you can print your own stationery with clip art. And then this is Barbie, the action-adventure platformer for DOS. And so both of these games came bundled with this doll. And this was a way to get the software in the toy aisle or the Barbie aisle where they thought, you know, girls or their parents would be shopping. And so
well, this must be pretty early too, right? This must be like, what, 90, 91, something like that?
I would say this is 91. Let's see. Yeah, 1991.
Wow. That's so early to be
That's
marketing
so cool.
floppy games in a toy aisle. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And that
And so
brings up
there
a
you-
really, I mean, I feel like, I don't know how often this was done, but it now strikes me that it's kind of strange that more toy companies didn't try bundling a little toy with software. I mean, now we have like collector's editions and stuff that have toys for adults in them, right? Like action figures and statues and stuff. But surely it would have worked on children the same way, you know? Have your He-Man action figure with your He-Man PC game or whatever.
Yeah. I think like as soon as I think the big switch was like, when did the game media become cheap enough that it could be sort of like a freebie? Because of course a cartridge like this, you know, it's $50. These are expensive to manufacture. But yeah, floppy disks, and then eventually like CD-ROMs.
Well, right, and then CD-ROM is like cheap, and also by that point everyone has one, right? Whereas in 1990, you know, to have a you know, a DOS computer at home with a floppy drive like wasn't that common.
Yeah.
But yeah, starting in maybe like 98 or something, I would expect that to work with CD-ROM stuff. That's when you see stuff like Chex Quest, right? In cereal. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I've seen some questions come up in chat, and we've just been chatting away, and I think we missed some of them. So feel free. We're gonna have some time for Q&A at the end as well. So don't feel embarrassed. Just re-ask those questions if we don't see them in chat. We'd be happy to get to those. So Frank and Kelsey, do y'all have any artifacts that fit this like sort of toy game crossover vibe? I feel like Kelsey, you might.
I do, yeah, and unfortunately I put them a little bit too far away from me, so I have to step away from the microphone for a second. But I don't know how many people in chat have heard of the Sega Pico. It's an educational console that I kind of flew under everyone's radar if you were like an actual gamer and not a child, right? Because it's a strange. I'm going to go grab it real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay. I can show off something from the Foundation's collection while Kelsey's doing that. So we don't have a lot of this stuff because, I mean, we're not as focused as the FEMICOM Museum, right? Like you are very specifically focused on this sort of feminine coded stuff. What we're mostly focused on is things like media and other stuff that would sort of help an historian just generally writing about games. But something that was of interest to us were plug and play games, especially from the early 2000s. We thought that was sort of an underrepresented market, much like the LCD games in the 90s, really. And something that we have here, it's a very large box, is a Strawberry Shortcake Dance Revolution. It is its own plug and play mat that looks kind of like that. I'm not going to bother getting it out of the box. There are screenshots on the back. This is an official Konami product. So it's actually Konami and Majesco. And the hardware that's running this thing is actually an unofficial modification of the 8-bit NES in like 2005. So that's, I think, the most interesting sort of girly game artifact in the Foundation's collection.
You know, you remind me of, I wasn't even going to bring this out, but this is another plug and play, My Little Pony Grand Adventure. Which came packaged with a My Little Pony figure. I believe this one may also be a modified NES, so we'll have to talk later about this.
Oh yeah, I'll check it out.
Or if not a modified NES, it feels like a modified. It feels like a system on a chip kind of vibe. So
I'm gonna look that up. All right, what do you got, Kelsey?
So I've got some Pico stuff, and it's all sort of in boxes because I was going to send it to you, Rachel, and I still will. This is all stuff for the FEMICOM Museum, but so the Pico's this educational console, but it also had a spot where you could kind of slot in these little modules that basically functioned as toys. And I'll do my best to kind of show this thing off because it's enormous. This is
the Pico. Okay.
Yeah, this is one of my Picos. I bought a giant lot of Japanese Pico stuff from someone because there was just so many cool little accessories with it. So you have things like this little doll. There's one of the things I have is hair salon. for the Pico. And so you can see in the instruction booklet here all of the little pieces that come with it. You have a little doll with a brush and a mirror and all kinds of little things like that. There is also a kitchen one. I'm just showing off the manuals because it's a lot easier to show off everything with, with the manuals. It's very bulky. So you have like a little pink kitchen here for learning how to cook for kids. And I think this is so cool because it really is that intersection of toy and game. And, you know, I'm not as familiar with the Pico. Here's the purple knife. It's great. I'm not as familiar with the Pico, sort of the Pico accessories over here, but in Japan, there were like a ton of you know, very involved toy accessories where you have these multi-part, like 10 individual parts that all slot into this one video game.
Kelsey, we were in the chat about the doll. Do you know if that's Rika-chan? Or just a generic doll?
I mean, here's the manual for it. I don't
get the title. Like
yeah. No, I don't know.
Yeah, I was just curious because there were a lot of, like, you know, of course Barbie in the US, but I think in the Japanese games too, Rika-chan and other sort of popular dolls were tied into these products. So I was curious to know. But it looks like a generic doll to me.
Yeah, I think it might just be generic, but I don't know. I think this is such a cool little way for girls to play. Another thing that I wanted to bring up when you were showing off some of your electronics is just the girly stuff, right? Always seems to have the best color design. I feel like you just get some of the most interesting colors. I think you have something you were going to show up later, Frank, that is a good example of this. But the PS2.
Oh yeah.
So this is the Hannah Montana PSP. This came out in America, obviously. Hannah Montana is very big here. But what an excellent color, right? Like, where else could you get a lilac purple PSP? And so I think one of the things that they do so well in marketing to girls is have really excellent color design in the product.
Yeah, you know, the Hannah Montana PSP was widely panned when it came out. By reviewers who said, "How dare they make a purple PSP?" It's not like we stopped making the black ones.
and it's so crazy because, you know, if you go all the way back to earlier handhelds and stuff, even let's just step back a little bit. You know, the main color of the Game Boy Advance, the original Game Boy Advance that everyone had, was indigo. It's a purple Game Boy. Some people like to call it blue. That is a purple Game Boy.
Oh, the GameCube as well, right? The GameCube.
Yeah, GameCube too, yeah.
And that was called Indigo as well, right?
Yeah.
I've done this is again another tangent, but I've done a really fascinating study on the topic of color and video game consoles, where you will see in Wikipedia and other online archives that hardware for girls is actually color corrected to be more purple, more pink, and regular consoles are tinted the other way. So you actually look at Game Boy pictures of GameCubes online. They seem to follow a pattern where they are tinted more blue than they are in real life. And many pictures of, for example, the Cassie Loopy show it as purple, and it is definitely gray, 100%.
Interesting.
So there's a really interesting sort of storytelling happening through Photoshop.
I also wonder about just the way they name the colors sometimes too. Like if the colors are named in purposefully more or less girly ways, depending on who they're marketing to. Because I mean, you have some of the Game Boy Color colors sound sort of girly to me. You know, the yellow was called Dandelion. The reddish pink one was called Berry. Then you have teal, lime, atomic purple. You have to make, you can't just have purple. You have to have like a cool extreme thing with it. So it's an atomic purple.
It has to sound like something that kills a lot of people.
Yeah. It's purple but death.
There's a whole graduate thesis in here. I love it.
I always have to find a way to bring in the Wonder Swan, but they have the best color scheme names, like sherbet melon and mint soda, and yeah, some good ones there. But those are coded pretty girly to me. I feel like food related names that feels a lot less manly than Atomic Purple.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point too. Is like, I think part of the problem with this, you know, idea of video games for girls, whatever that sort of contentious phrase means, is that, you know, I think it's difficult because people see games like the ones that we've shown, and sometimes the reaction is, oh, this is pandering, or this is harmful, or this is reinforcing negative stereotypes about girls. And I certainly like respect that opinion, and certainly many girls didn't like these games when they came out. But I think, like, you know, the reason I do this work, aside from the fact that I obviously love this stuff, is that you know, I was interested in sort of counteracting these negative attitudes about girly video games, you know, this dismissiveness, the saying like it's not real, or it's dumb because it's for girls, or this is insulting to women. All of these like ideas were actually keeping these games from being part of video game history, and these like incredible games and stories were actually being lost. And I think truly, like, no joke, especially when I started Famicom back in 2012, games like these were not in games databases. The Cassie Loopy was not well known. These games weren't on Wikipedia. I remember in the early days putting information about Barbie games on Wikipedia and having my pages deleted. All of the, you know, I think a lot of the YouTube content was pretty like dismissive and almost sort of like toxic and weird. And I just saw this erasure happening around me and thought, like, we had to do something about this, right? Because many people actually legitimately treasure these games, and I get so many messages. I mean, like, looking in chat, you know, I'm seeing
they're asking about the Loopy, yeah.
Yeah, like, where's the Loopy? And also, you know, talking to people who said, you know, I haven't seen a game like, you know, for example, I'm just gonna pull one out of the box here, Barbie Storymaker. This is a game like people send me messages about. I didn't know anyone else played this. I haven't thought about this in 20 years. Or the developers I talked to who are like, no one has ever asked me about my work because I worked on a Bratz game or something. Yeah. So my point is, like, these games deserve a place in video game history and in retro gaming culture, which I think are kind of related but distinct. So when I say retro gaming culture, I mean, like, we should be reviewing these games. We should be making fan art. We should be hacking them. We should be doing investigative reporting. We should be making perler bead characters and selling them in booths at retro gaming conventions. Like, all the fun ways that we remix Mario and Mega Man and Link, we should be doing with, you know, Mackenzie and Company from Her Interactive.
I played that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm curious to know what y'all think, but, you know, sometimes I think we think of video game history like archaeology, where we're just like pulling bones out of the ground, or like ET carts, you know, as the case may be. And it's like, oh, we're unearthing these games and dusting them off, and like, here's the truth of what really happened. But, you know, it's like, it's important to remember that history is storytelling, and all of us have this perspective we bring, and all video game history is told through the lens of people who tell it. I always think of Ralph Baer as my go-to example of this. You know, the archivists, the collectors, the people preserving the legacy. You and me. Yeah. What do y'all think on this?
I mean, I think, you know, I think a big part of why it's hard to find any information about the kinds of games that you study is that most of what we have that talked about games in their time are traditional video game media. And outlets like, you know, Electronic Gaming Monthly, GamePro, even Nintendo Power, they're not really talking about the girly stuff. They're talking about, you know, the sort of gamer stuff. And I mean, Kelsey, you know, before this panel, you were trying to look around the Internet Archive to see if you could find like advertising for these games.
Right, because we know that, yeah, most of us read game magazines when we were younger. We know that we don't remember seeing girly games advertised in them. And also, you know, of course, the foundation has 10,000 magazines, and I know that there's not really girly game advertisements in them. So I'm like, okay, well, clearly they were advertised somewhere. They were probably advertised in magazines that were geared towards girls. But that brings up the second layer of the problem, which is that no one's scanning magazines no one's scanning girls' magazines. There's no, looking on the Internet Archive, there's like maybe 20 whole issues of 17 magazine, and that's like the big one, So,
like, I just very distinctly remember this game being advertised in Teen Magazine. Because I was subscribed to Teen Magazine, and I remember seeing like Cosmo Makeover and Clueless and some of those other games marketed in there, and like, yeah, that's probably all lost.
Yeah,
yeah, and I mean,
not only do we have this problem with regular video game history, where we're sometimes, it's a struggle to try to find information about these games, just because even those magazines aren't necessarily all online, or they're difficult to find. It becomes even doubly so for things that weren't advertised in those magazines that there's a following of people that care about in the first place. So, not only is it hard to look at any video game history, sometimes it's even more difficult to look at video game history that wasn't covered by traditional video game media.
Yeah. So since we brought up ET cards, I feel compelled now to show this. This is Strawberry Shortcake musical matchups from 1983 for the Atari. One of the oldest games in the Famicom collection. At 83, it's tied with Girls Garden for the SG-1000 for oldest console game.
Yeah.
What a great one.
But Girls Garden by Sonic co-creator Yuji Naka.
Girls Garden is a good game too.
I like Girls Garden. Yeah, I'll play Girls Garden right now. Yeah, the other thing too, just on that note, a big part of what we're trying to collect here is the material that the video game media was given to use in their coverage. So, press kits and flyers and things like that, screenshots on film. And I looked as hard as I could through our collection before this panel to try to find some feminine coded stuff, and there's just not a lot. So
they gave up on trying to pitch to the game magazine.
Right. It's not only that the magazines ignored it, it's that they weren't even given the material to run with, as far as we can tell. So it's if you're looking in the video game media to find vintage coverage of feminine coded video games, that's just not going to work. Actually, Rachel, just briefly, like, where have you found coverage of these things? Is it teen magazines? Is it like parent magazines?
It's a couple things. Yeah, there are kids media outlets, some of which were digital native, so like early web. Toy trade magazines, like you mentioned before, have these. For many of the Japanese items, they did receive coverage in Japanese gaming media. And I think that's a whole interesting thing to explore. I think in some cases the games that we might think of as being girly in the US, like Sailor Moon games, were seen as more like general audience games in Japan. And that's a sort of like, I think sometimes we like bring a Western perspective to games in Japan, and it doesn't quite map. And so I think that's something important to note, is like, I think Sailor Moon games and some of these things were seen as more sort of general audience. And so you do see more coverage there than you would in the US.
Got it.
So do we want to move on? I know we've had some questions about the Cassie Loopy, and I've got plenty to share.
You guys are asking the right person here.
Okay.
As long as I'm not keeping you off schedule.
No.
Okay, all right.
So
yeah, I want to hear about the Loopy. Let's go. Yeah,
let's do it. So I was going to preface this by saying, I think if we think about video game history as storytelling, kind of like closing the loop on our last conversation, for me, like what I'm really passionate about is imagining a world where we don't put down or discard these histories because they were meant to be things that were fun for girls, right? And there's another hidden message in this, which is like this, we see that girls' game history being discarded. There's this other piece to that, which is like, broadly, culturally, femininity is sort of culturally subjugated. It's bad, it's embarrassing, and we should make fun of it or throw it away. And then, people come a couple of years later and go, oh, I guess there weren't any video games for girls. And it's like, there were, you just threw it all away.
And I think sometimes women are like a big part of that problem too. I mean, certainly I was for many years. I very, very much like rejected the idea of being girly because I was serious. I was, I wasn't like the girls who cared about their nails and Barbie dolls and whatever, so you get a lot of pushback from both sides too. And that really, I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons it's hurt so much is because who's protecting it if both sides are, are rejecting it.
Yep. Kelsey, I had the same exact experience growing up. There was a point where I got serious about playing guitar, which I guess I still do. And yeah, I decided I was going to eschew all of the girly stuff because yeah, exactly. I'm not like other girls.
We're the cool girls.
Which is like, ooh, problematic. Let's shake that apart. So I try to do that with this collection, right? And I'm sure all of us have a story, regardless of your gender. We have some experience of where we were made fun of for doing something girly. So fortunately, I like girly things, and I no longer care about being made fun of. So let's get into some more selections. I'm going to get to the Loopy in a second, but firstly, I do want to show one other fan favorite, which is the. While we're talking about consoles, this is the Hello Kitty Dreamcast in a beautiful translucent pink, so you can see all of the components on the inside. This came in both a pink and a blue. And it came with a matching keyboard as well as a pink translucent controller, which I happen to have here. Absolutely gorgeous. Oh, look at you. Yes, that's a Star Wars Dreamcast, is it not?
Happened to be within reach, and I was like, oh, I also have a pink one.
I don't have a pink Dreamcast.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, not part of the cool kids club, I guess.
I think it's funny sometimes. People will say like, oh, there's a green Hello Kitty Dreamcast, or there's an orange Hello Kitty Dreamcast. And you're like, yeah, that's the blue one that yellowed, or that's the pink one that yellowed. There was not an orange, nor was there a green, just blue and pink. But yeah, I love that one. Let's get into the Loopy. So
actually, I think many people I can share pictures of the pink PS2. So we. Like I said in our archive, we collect the things that were sent to magazines. So these are actually press photos that were given in a press kit at Gamescom, I think it was that year. The text Magic Gate on here, is that in a normal PS2 or is that just the pink one?
No, that's the memory card. That's the memory card.
I've just never read that text before. Yeah. But what I liked was there are a couple lifestyle photos of girls playing SingStar on the pink PS2.
I like that the mom's getting involved. That's nice.
Wait, which one's the mom?
Was the last one, is that lady not the mom? She looks like the mom.
Oh, maybe not. Oh, I can't go back anymore. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
That's the closest I can get to sharing a pink console. So
that's perfect. I love it. And I just remembered, I have another pink console that I didn't bring out, but look it up online later. In Brazil only, they made a pink Sega Master System called the Master System Girl, which I have. Bright pink, beautiful, love it. All right, let's talk about the Cassie Loopy. So I'm a little bit known for my fanaticism about the Loopy. I have possibly the world's largest collection. I have every boxed copy in multiple box configurations, all the accessories and hardware, and actually had an opportunity to meet some of the original developers of Loopy during some time in Tokyo. So here it is. This is it's that Casio. They made a 32-bit console, and the entire console and its library was marketed to girls. And you can see that pretty clearly in the logo and package design. Again, gorgeous. You do see that even the box of this has this console as purple. I promise inside it is gray. And so it's kind of an interesting cue there. But what you might notice and what some people have mentioned in chat is that there is a full color sticker printer right here on the front. So you can print stickers from the game. And in fact, there's an attachment where you can bring in an AV source. And so you can take a photo of yourself, decorate it in the game, and then print it out. And so this is like early purikura at home, which is pretty amazing. So I want to show you one of the stickers printed from this. There are a couple different sticker sizes, different accessories, but this is one. This is from the, this is an avatar from, let's see, it's from this game, Anime Land, where you can make an anime version of yourself on different backgrounds, different hairstyles, and things like that. But this sticker is pretty special because it was actually printed by one of the developers and given to me while I at Casio headquarters. And so this is kind of a special sticker. There were about 10 or 11 games for the Loopy, so not a big library. It was considered a commercial failure, but some interesting games nonetheless. Here's another one. This is Loopy Town no Oheya na Hoshi, or I Want a Room in Loopy Town. And if you take a look at the box art, you'll see a stunning resemblance to Animal Crossing. So indeed, your character has a little room, and you buy furniture and put it in the room, and you pay for the furniture by having a small part-time job. So this actually predates Animal Crossing, but is very similar in gameplay. And was also had narrative designed by Kenji Tarara, who worked on Final Fantasy series. I have one other game from the Loopy collection that I want to show. This is for Jean. This is the rarest and hardest to find in box because it was the last game in the library. This is Chakra-kun no Omajinai Paradise, which is like it's a fortune-telling cat. It has lots of mystical sort of graphics and things like that. So it's very much my vibe. I do want to pull one of these out so you can see kind of the form factor of the cartridge if you haven't seen one of these before. This is a very minty copy of Chakra-kun. And we also have in here a little overlay for the sticker so you can align your stickers properly once they're printed out. And there was some interesting software. For example, one of the Loopy games let you create comic panels. And so you could print the stickers out and make your own comic books. And each sticker was like a pane. And so they had like text tools and things like that to make your own comic books. So super interesting, fascinating kind of marginalized history of girl games.
Cool. So kind of a random question. Can you make third-party replacement stickers for the Loopy, or are you stuck having to use real Loopy stickers?
Yes, this is a great question. So I did some investigation on this because Casio also made some sticker Casio made some sticker printing devices in the US that were essentially label maker type things. So they weren't related to a game, but they did have a similar style cartridge. And so I bought one of the Casio label makers thinking that I might be able to use the stickers for that. But they have a very proprietary kind of tape cartridge, a drop-in cartridge. And from what I can tell, this printer has something similar, but it's different. It doesn't fit. So yeah, I think the dead stock for this is quite hard to find. So I personally don't print stickers. What I'd love to do is to have something like, hook up an Arduino or something and have a Game Boy printer, have a little receipt printer, thermal printer print these out, or a small color printer. But that would suggest that there is an emulator for the Loopy, which of course does not exist.
That was my next question. Yeah. Okay.
Much to my dismay. Yeah, it's the CPU architecture it's RISC-based. It's somewhat similar to the Saturn, I believe. And there's been some slight work on an emulator, but honestly, I think it's just not a high priority because of the small library and the fact that it was, it was for girls.
Yeah.
I do have one other game console I want to show. This one's maybe a little contentious, but I also really love it. This is the Barbie Game Wizard. Have y'all seen this before?
Cool.
You know I have, because I sent you pictures of it from a catalog.
Yep.
That thing's so cool.
That's awesome.
So, what is this? This is a handheld console that comes with 2 cartridges, and you can see these are real cartridges. They have pins down there in the bottom, so you can insert them into this console. But by nature of LCD games, the screen travels with the game because, of course, by nature of LCD graphics, they aren't really interchangeable. They're for one game and one game only. So this housing here does, the sound, the power, the controls, and all of that. And the cartridge actually has a screen built in. So depending on your definition of console, which I think this fits, this would be the only handheld console specifically marketed to girls. Another interesting thing to note about the Barbie Game Wizard, odd name, but they made a non-Barbie Game Wizard for context. So there was the Game Wizard and then the Barbie Game Wizard. So yeah,
the Atomic Game Wizard.
Listen, it comes with a small, a miniature version for your doll.
Which for Barbie?
This is like, Barbie did this all the time. There's a Barbie PS1 controller that comes with a little tiny PS1 controller for your doll. So they were on top of it when it came to marketing. I did want to point out also that this game, like many of the Barbie handhelds, was made by Microgames of America, MGA, which they made a lot of handheld games in the kind of early 90s. But later they went on to create the Bratz doll line, which of course was a big competitor to Barbie. So kind of interesting that in MGA's pre-Bratz days, they were actually Microgames of America, and they were making electronic handhelds, including Barbie ones.
I mean, it's interesting you bring up, does this one sort of count as a video game system? And it's like, well, the Tiger R-Zone is the exact same thing. That counts. The what's the 80s one? The Microvision? Isn't that one another one where the LCDs? Yeah, the LCD screen. Yeah. Like
people call
that's
that
in all the collector guides.
Handheld, like people will call that one the first handheld video game console.
So there is no possible way to not count this as a video game system if either of those two are video game systems. So
all right, well, I need you to come back to the forums that I got.
You can find it that way. Video Game History Foundation recognizes it as a video game console.
Yeah, can we rewrite the canon? Yes. If we publish an article that calls it a video game console, can Wikipedia then cite that article and say it's a video game console?
You have too much power.
Not on camera, Frank.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Totally.
I want to know about the future before we run out of time. What's the future of
I know.
retro gaming?
I want to talk about that a little bit. So, I think what we've been talking a lot about was sort of the history of girly games. But I'm also interested in the future. And part of that is like reclaiming space in retro gaming culture to celebrate femme aesthetics and celebrate these games, which we're doing right now. Awesome. Thank you, everyone who's come to watch this. And I talk about things like reviewing games, making T-shirts, making like YouTube reviews. The way that I personally kind of live out this philosophy is by making my own 8-bit homebrew games. And so I'm kind of like inserting my own perspective into the historical record. And I have, I think, somewhere around here, yes. So I've been making NES games for a while. These are a few of them. This is a Love Horoscope game, Electronic Sweet and Fun Fortune Teller.
I have that one.
You have this one? It's collectible.
I don't have it in the box.
Oh yeah, there are only 2 boxes ever made. There's some bootlegs actually. Someone made a bootleg box, which is amazing.
That's where you made it. That's awesome. That's history right there. If people are bootlegging your homebrew games.
Wait, which one got bootleg?
Someone made a bootleg copy of the box for Electronic Sweet and Fun Fortune Teller.
Nice. Something I just grabbed something off our shelves. Did you work on Dashing Secretary?
Oh, Zooming Secretary?
Zooming secretary. Yeah.
No, I interviewed one of the developers. I love the game.
So that is, you would call that a modern retro girly game, right?
Yeah.
So this is a portable system called the Go Retro Portable from Retrobit, and it's got a ton of NES games on it. You know, stuff you've heard of, like Mega Man, whatever. And what is it? Zooming Secretaries? Is that the name? Yeah, Zooming Secretaries is just straight up on here. Along with some actual like old retro games. So in a weird way, like the movement that you're a part of is sort of rewriting that history.
Yeah,
right. Inserted it among like the actual old NES games.
Yeah, it's next to Tetris and Mega Man on this thing that you can buy in a store right now, which is really cool.
Well,
Bionic Commando.
And you know, I was a consultant for a video game history exhibit that happened here in Austin, and they said they were specifically focused on game developers in Texas, right? Was sort of their focus, but it was about video game history broadly. And I was a consultant, and they said, "Oh, well, we heard you made this game. You know, we think we should put it in the museum." And I was like, "Oh, I'm honored, you know, but it's not that historically important." You know, my historian self is saying you probably shouldn't include it in this exhibit of like, you know, there's like Space Invaders and Mario and Sonic and then like my dinky game. But they were actually super interested in this idea of like rewriting history. And so they actually put this in the history part of the exhibit. And it was literally, I think, between Tetris and Pong or something. There's just like this little placard with this game. And the folks at the museum were actually super interested in this like insertion of false history. And of course, if you went up and read the plaque, it had the details. But I love that sort of like museum intervention where you put something behind glass and suddenly it's an artifact. There's a question in chat about accepting donations for FEMICOM. Yes, I'm going to put femicom.org into the chat, and I think there's a donate page with there's like a Google form that you can go to. So whether it's a PayPal contribution or you have a game that you want to mail in, I've actually gotten a few of these collection items from just regular folks who had them and wanted them to live on. So yeah, absolutely. So I want to end. I know we're running very short on time. So I had a whole live coding session. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 5 minutes, but I do want to share just briefly to help folks get started. If you're interested in this sort of participatory history making by either creating homebrew games or just hacking them. So I'm going to share my screen quickly, and I'll probably do that really annoying thing where I say, "Can you all see my screen?" But actually, I think I can see it. So I think
we can see your screen.
Yeah,
you can see my screen.
We can.
Perfect. Okay. So I just wanted to plug this 8-Bit Workshop website, which is actually a really cool way to play with homebrew. And it was made by Stephen Hogg. It basically embeds a source code and emulators side by side. So you can develop homebrew games in real time without having any tool chain on your machine. This is so cool. I really wish that I had this when I was learning. Because it's amazing. Like getting tools set up to do homebrew is such a huge hurdle when you're starting out. And so you can see, for example, this is an Atari game with some sample code. And I see right here, I'm not super familiar with Atari code, but it's commented, load value into A, 30 is deep red. So I have a feeling if I change 30 to, I don't know, 20 or 10
wow,
or 60.
Yeah.
I can see this in real time.
Oh, and it just reloads it automatically. Yeah. You don't have to build, right? Like it's that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. And so I actually have
Astrocade.
Yes, Astrocade is another system I developed for it. Actually, Stephen included some of my open source ROMs in here, and you can see I'm out here preaching the gospel, pastel colors, just sort of cute graphics. Because this is sort of like the vibe I want to put out in the world. And again, also heavily commented so folks can get started rewriting their own history. What I would have done if I had had time And what I encourage you to do as an exercise for the readers, and we may go a little bit over. I heard from the folks running the event that it's okay if we go a little bit over. So if folks want to stick around, but ZX Spectrum, there's this great game. It's a clone of a game you might have seen before. And you can get in here and actually edit the graphics, right? Edit your ship. Like if you wanted to make this like a cat or something cute, you can do that. You can go in, and again, I'm not an expert in the, oh, look at this really great graphic here. I'm by no means an expert in the Spectrum, but I can kind of read through this code and very quickly go, oh yeah, this is video attributes. I can probably change this and yep, get some updated colors.
Nice.
That's
not good. That's a great one though.
You know, I can go in here and probably change this text. I could probably search for player 1 and change it to, I don't know, hey girl. And I see it update.
Yeah.
So things like this, I mean, it's very silly. And of course, this is not like a great experience, but it brings up these really interesting questions about, you know, what does it mean for a game from this era to be girly or for girls, especially these early games? Like, how can you even tell? It's just the palettes and like 5 pixels that are arranged slightly more cutely. I think there are a lot of, you know, game study folks who have claimed that early video games weren't capable of appealing to women and girls because of things like memory limitations or something. And I think an exercise like this is a great way to sort of call that assumption into question. You can see, you know, if you learned assembly or C, it'd be quite easy. I mean, I know I kind of glossed over the hard part there. Just spend 10 years teaching yourself 6502 assembly. But once you get there, or use a tool like this where something's already created, it's actually quite self-evident how to make a game with emotions or cuteness or femme aesthetics in the confines of a constrained system like the Speccy or the NES. So, and that's exactly what I do. I think a lot of this conception of whether a game is girly or not sort of happens in our minds, and through the packaging, our mentality sort of creates this story. You know, I think of like, you know, a game like this. Did I show this one yet? The Scanimals Pet Rescue?
No.
This is a barcode scanning game. You might be familiar with these for the ones that were marketed to boys. This is a girl version. You scan barcodes around your house and pets come out and you collect them. And this is like really similar to Barcode Battler or other things, just kind of in a different packaging. It's housed in a purse, kind of like with a strap on the side, and you're rescuing cute animals instead of, I guess, Barcode Battlers was monsters.
Well, and especially with those, like, you know, Tiger Electronics type games, I mean, there's nothing inherently girly about what's going on the screen. There's very little, you know, like they're all very similar games. They're like super simple platformers or, you know, a tennis type game or something like that. There's nothing inherently girly about that. But then if you surround it in pink and images of Polly Pockets and that sort of thing, then all of a sudden it's a girly game. But if you surrounded it in black and blue and put an image of Batman on it, now it's like a real video game or whatever.
Yep.
Rachel, I have a question for you.
What's that?
So, you know, you're straight up coding in assembly, which is bonkers. Is it? I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Is it important to you in terms of sort of reclaiming history that you're coding in actual vintage hardware as opposed to making something in for modern hardware using retro aesthetics?
If I understand the question correctly, and I was distracted because someone wanted to see this game again, is the question about the fact that is it important to be on original hardware?
For you, is it? Yeah. Why? I guess is the question. Why is it important?
Why
to
learn
you
assembly?
Why is it important to you to be on that authentic old hardware as opposed to making something that might have retro aesthetics or something like that?
Yeah, I think for me, like, I do really want to, I'm interested in the artifact. I'm interested in the box. I'm interested in the manual. I'm interested in where this would go in the toy aisle. I'm interested in challenging this idea that you can't make a cute game in 8 kilobytes or 16 kilobytes. I've done that. It's totally doable. You know, I think it honestly started with, for me, just like an interest. When I started learning assembly, I didn't know how to code or anything. I was like,
you started in assembly?
I started in assembly, yeah. I was like, I wonder how they made old NES games. Oh, there's something called 6502 assembly. And I went on a forum and people were like, get out of our forum.
Get out of our cave.
I bought some books and I taught myself from books, which is like, yeah, now that I say it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of a bizarre way to start. And like somehow, you know, 10 years later, I ended up being a software engineer. But yeah, I think like, so I started on that path, but yeah, I am interested in the historical aspect of it. And I think what better way to do that than to be, you know, to go through that process. Like I struggle with the things that I'm sure NES developers struggled with. You know, at Capcom, I was like, oh God, I have to write another sound engine. Why don't we reuse the one from Mega Man 1? Oh, all the Mega Man soundtracks are the same. Well, yeah, I'm not writing another sound engine. So yeah, they're all going to sound the same.
I guess
yeah, I think it
gives that would be
really interesting historical perspective.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to ask, like, is there a system or tool specifically that you recommend, or would it just be that website you were showing us?
Honestly,
to get started.
Yeah, to get started, 8-Bit Workshop IDE is a great way to explore different systems, to see what you'd be interested in, to see if you're more of like a C person or an assembly person. If you're interested in the NES specifically, reach out to me on Twitter. I just put my Twitter handle in chat, Partytime Hexlet. I have resources. I don't know the URLs off the top of my head, but I'm happy to share them. I have lots of open source code as well that's like really, really highly commented. So if you're interested in the NES or the Astrocade, I can give you very specific recommendations. But I think 8-Bit Workshop is a great place to get started for. I mean, just if you look at the I don't have my screen shared anymore, but like Atari, Commodore, ColecoVision, SG-1000, Apple II, there's just an amazing variety of systems that you can play with in the browser, and not having to download the tool chain is such a huge heads up or leg up. Cool. Well, I know we are a little bit over time. Frank and Kelsey, I know I've just been like excitedly rambling. Was there anything
what we're here for?
Yeah, we're basically like the audience, but we can ask questions whenever we want. No, do not worry about it. We defer to you on this stuff for sure. But is the question, is there anything we want to talk about in terms of
is there anything you want, in the last minute or two that we could probably spare some of the folks that are staying later?
The negative 4 minutes we have here.
I mean, I asked Mike questions. What do you got, Kelsey?
I don't know. I think I made all the points I wanted to make. I feel like, especially in regards to just how, because a lot of what we do at the foundation is trying to make this stuff more accessible to people, and talking about how much harder this is than traditional video game stuff, which is already pretty hard.
Yeah.
Hard enough that it necessitated a whole foundation about it. So
beautiful. Is that based on
the camera until they cut me off?
Was that based on the same game as the NES and DOS one?
No, it's a different one.
Cool.
Yeah.
I guess if I have a final comment inspired by all this, it's question the narrative in all things.
Yeah.
Just always question the written history. Oh, bootleg Famicom.
I know I didn't get to this one, but bootleg Barbie game for Famicom, amazing.
Is that just Barbie?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Although there's a great another Barbie bootleg game that is like, I think it's Dig Dug, but with a modified screen that says Barbie.
Nice.
Same number of letters.
Awesome. It's amazing how much you could probably change. I mean, if you do nothing else but just do like a ROM hack of anything and change the colors to be like pink and light blue and pastels and stuff, just you can turn anything into a quote unquote girly game.
Well, Rachel, wasn't it you that did the Mega Man 2 hack that just replaced the font?
Yeah.
Did you just swap it for the Barbie font or something?
Mm-hmm.
That's so good.
Just like it's Mega Man 2, but like slightly curly. And people on romhacking.net were like, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen," and that made me so happy.
Yeah, because you don't necessarily disagree with that statement.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we should probably wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone who joined in, everyone who participated in chat. If I missed any of your questions, again, I put my Twitter info in chat. Please hit me up. I love to talk about the stuff in case it wasn't super obvious. Thank you, Frank and Kelsey, for joining as well. It's always lovely to see you.
Can we plug our panel real quick?
Please, yes.
We have a panel tomorrow. Do you remember what time, Kelsey?
It is, I think 11 a.m. Pacific, which is 2 p.m. Eastern.
And it's with Jeremy Parrish, and we'll be talking about the foundation itself and what we're about, if you're interested in that. So we hope to see you there.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.